What if Hillary Clinton had won the 2016 election? Man, making this video is going to make me feel so old. It's been over 9 years since the 2016 election. Can you believe that? That feels impossible. Anyways, welcome back to Stickman Talks, everyone. First off, thank you all so much for 40,000 subscribers. That's insane. We've seen some crazy growth on the channel over the past couple of months, and all I can say is thank you. Seriously, it means so much. Anyways, today we're once again turning back the clock a bit, as part of what may become a series on altering the outcome of previous presidential elections. If you missed my first video on what if Kamala Harris had won the 2024 election, feel free to check that out after you watch this. Looking back, 2016 feels like a simpler time. I think we can all agree on that. Pokemon Go, the death of Harambe, the first season of Stranger Things, probably a bunch of other pop culture moments that I can't remember, and of course, the 2016 election. Coming into the primaries for 2016, no one took Donald Trump seriously. It could even be said that just before election night, no one really took Donald Trump seriously. It's absurd to think that things were once like that, but it's true. The New York Times, for example, gave Hillary Clinton an 85% chance to win the race. In the weeks building up to the election, that projection got as high as 93%. Many others had Clinton winning comfortably as well. I can't show all of the maps, but the website 270 to Win has a database that compiled all of the final forecasts. I'll link it down below in my sources. As we all know though, that's not what ended up happening. Trump shocked much of the nation and the rest of the world by winning the election with a total of 306 electoral votes to Clinton's 232. He took home key swing states in the Rust Belt, including Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, while also winning Georgia and Arizona. Clinton would go on to win the popular vote, but ultimately Trump's victory in 2016 meant the beginning of a new era in American politics. So what if he had never won? What if, like many of the predictions had shown, Clinton had coasted to victory? That's what we're here to discuss today, and on the surface it seems like a fairly simple premise, but there's a lot more to it than that. In today's video, I'm not only going to explore the primary scenario where Clinton had won, but also recap the build-up to the 2016 election, Trump's first presidency, and see how Clinton's policies would have differed in general. What would she have done first? How would the country have reacted? How could a Clinton win in 2016 have impacted politics today? Before we get into all of that, please be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed today's video, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. Also, feel free to check out my Substack in the description down below. I do weekly dives on there on news you may have missed that you may be interested in. Now let's get into our change to recent history, the build up to a Clinton win and its immediate aftermath. Before we fully rewrite history, we first need to quickly examine just how Clinton lost the 2016 election, because to a lot of people, it really was quite shocking. Ultimately, like always, the race came down to key swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, like I already mentioned. If those three states had flipped in favor of Clinton, she would have been the president-elect. And like I just said a few seconds ago, the results in these states were surprising. In the week leading up to Election Day, Real Clear Politics polling averages had Clinton's lead in Pennsylvania at plus 2.1. In Michigan, it was an even larger plus 3.6. And in Wisconsin, it was a whopping plus 6.5. How in the world did she lose all three of these states? Well, it came down to a few things, the most important of which I'd argue was a little bit of hubris on the part of the Clinton campaign. After she lost the election, reports began to come in that Clinton and her campaign didn't just want to win the 2016 election, they wanted to run up the score a bit. So instead of campaigning in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, they sent teams to states like Arizona and Iowa instead, where, according to polling averages, Trump led by 4 points and 3 points respectively. In hindsight, this obviously ended up being a mistake. According to a Politico report post-election, quote, guided by polls that showed the Midwestern states safer, the campaign spent, according to one internal estimate, about 3% as much in Michigan and Wisconsin as it spent in Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina. Most voters in Michigan didn't see a television ad until the final week. To add to that, the Clinton campaign largely dismissed what's known as in-person persuasion, as in no one was going door to door to try to gain support for the Democratic nominee. This meant that the campaign wasn't hearing from voters who weren't already likely Clinton voters, which probably messed with their internal data quite a bit. So why did Clinton lose? To at least some degree, it was pure campaign mismanagement and overconfidence. Like I said, no one was really taking Trump seriously here, especially those within the Clinton campaign. So now let's change history. Let's say, instead of focusing on running up the score, the Clinton campaign really tried to nail down voter support in key swing states, particularly in the Rust Belt. Let's say that election night rolls around, and because of their newfound focus, Clinton takes all three of those swing states I mentioned earlier in tight margins. Because of this, she ultimately wins the election 278 to 260, becoming the first ever female president-elect in United States history. What happens now? Well, you know Donald Trump would never go down without a fight. Even prior to 2020, he had a history of election denialism, the first of which, at least that I could find, came in 2016, when he called Obama's win in 2012, quote, a total sham. Meanwhile, after losing the 2016 Iowa GOP primary to Ted Cruz, Trump tweeted, quote, based on the fraud, fraud committed by Senator Ted Cruz during the Iowa caucus, either a new election should take place or Cruz results nullified. And finally, even after he won the 2016 election, he still claimed without evidence that he would have won the popular vote too if millions of people hadn't voted illegally. So it's clear that had he actually lost to Clinton in 2016, claims of voter fraud would have run rampant from Trump and his supporters. The thing is, there probably isn't much they would have been able to do about it. In swing states where the races would have been tight, they could have requested recounts and filed lawsuits, but that's about it. Given that this is pre any Trump presidency, he doesn't have the power or the influence in this timeline to cause something like what we saw on January 6th. So while we might have seen some political instability following a Clinton win, it's more than likely that she would have been sworn in without much issue the following January, especially with Obama in office still. How would her win have impacted the future of Trump in politics? We'll talk about that later on in this video. For now though, let's get into what Clinton's first 100 days might have looked like had she won. Hillary Clinton's first 100 days as president. Given that Clinton ran largely as a continuation of the Obama administration, it's safe to say her first 100 days would have largely felt like an Obama 3.0 in direction, but not necessarily in attitude. Before getting into how this alternate timeline would have unfolded differently from Trump's presidency, let's quickly walk through the biggest goals Clinton planned to tackle in her first 100 days. We're going to dive more in depth into all of these policy areas in a few minutes, but we'll start with a brief overview. To begin, a major early focus for Clinton would have been economic policy, particularly middle-class investment. During her 2016 campaign, she outlined a 100-day jobs plan built around infrastructure spending, clean energy investment, expanded broadband access, and support for advanced manufacturing. According to her published platform, she planned to introduce, quote, the biggest investment in infrastructure since Eisenhower, pushing Congress to pass a large jobs package aimed at rebuilding roads, bridges, tunnels, and public transit systems. She also emphasized paid family leave, raising the federal minimum wage to $12 an hour, and expanding apprenticeships. Critics of her plan argued it relied heavily on congressional cooperation that wasn't guaranteed, but the overall direction was clear. Her first 100 days would have launched with a major economic package focused on jobs and long-term growth. Moving on to healthcare, Clinton campaigned on strengthening and expanding the Affordable Care Act. In her first 100 days, she likely would have pushed Congress to enact a public option, which she called for repeatedly during the campaign and even described as a priority for her earliest legislative agenda. She also proposed capping out-of-pocket prescription drug costs at $250 per month and allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. While the public option would have required congressional approval, several of the administrative steps were plans she indicated she could have begun through executive authority. When it came to taxes, Clinton promised no tax increases for households earning under $250,000 per year, but she did commit to raising taxes on wealthy Americans. Her fair share surcharge proposal, a 4% surtax on income over $5 million, would likely have been included in her initial economic legislation along with the Buffett rule, which required millionaires to pay a minimum effective tax rate of 30%. She also supported closing loopholes on carried interest and implementing new taxes targeted at high-frequency traders. The full implementation of these policies would have taken longer than 100 days, but the groundwork would have begun almost immediately. Now let's talk about immigration. Clinton's platform called for introducing comprehensive immigration reform, quote, with a path to full and equal citizenship within her first 100 days. She proposed defending and expanding both DACA and DAPA, ending 3- and 10-year re-entry bars, and working with Congress to modernize the visa system. She also emphasized community-focused enforcement, promising to prioritize violent criminals rather than broad interior enforcement. In a 2016 speech, she said she would, quote, end family detention, increase access to counsel for asylum seekers, and close private immigration detention centers. That means her first 100 days would almost certainly have involved rolling back several Obama-era enforcement practices while simultaneously pushing Congress for a legalization bill. Whether she would have secured the votes for that bill is another story, but it would have been an early move. Before wrapping up, let's touch on foreign policy. Clinton made clear throughout her campaign that she planned to maintain strong U.S. support for NATO, reaffirm commitments to European allies, and take a harder line against Russia in response to election interference. She repeatedly called Russia's actions a direct attack on the United States and signaled that her first 100 days would include sanctions-oriented responses as well as a diplomatic push to counter Russian influence. In Syria, Clinton supported establishing no-fly zones to protect civilians, which was a policy she acknowledged would require coordination with Russia and NATO allies. She also planned to deepen involvement in the anti-ISIS coalition, continuing the Obama-era strategy but with expanded pressure on Bashar al-Assad. When it came to trade, she had publicly opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership by late 2016, but foreign policy advisors indicated she still supported a renegotiated version of the framework, meaning early diplomacy in Asia likely would have occurred behind the scenes. The last major emphasis of Clinton's first 100 days would have been a substantial push on clean energy and climate policy. She campaigned on generating enough renewable energy to power every American home within 10 years, expanding tax credits for solar energy, and defending Obama's Clean Power Plan, both of which were policies she signaled she could begin implementing quickly through regulatory authority at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy. While large-scale climate legislation would have required congressional support, her platform was clear that the administrative groundwork would have begun immediately for this. That's the landscape of what Hillary Clinton's first 100 days likely would have looked like had she won the 2016 election. But of course, that's not the world we ended up with. In the trajectory trajectory of US policy changed dramatically once Donald Trump took office. So what does that contrast look like when we put the two side by side? Let's break it down policy by policy. Trump's economics versus Clinton's economics. When we look at the 2016 election, the economy was obviously on the forefront of everyone's minds, as it always is. Both Trump and Clinton spoke constantly about rebuilding the middle class, reviving American manufacturing, and boosting wages. But once you dig into the specifics, their economic agendas were almost opposite in both structure and philosophy. And since we just walked through what Clinton would have tried to do during her first 100 days, now it's time to compare that vision to what Trump actually pushed once he entered office. To start with taxes, Trump's economic plan in 2016 was built around the biggest set of tax cuts in decades. His proposal consolidated individual tax brackets into 3 total groups, lowered the top individual rate to 33%, and cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 15%. He also called for eliminating the estate tax entirely and reducing taxes on pass-through business income. Supporters framed this approach as a growth engine designed to encourage investment and job creation, while critics argued at the time that it would add trillions of dollars to the national debt. Clinton's plan, meanwhile, went in the opposite direction. As I already mentioned, she promised no new taxes on households earning under $250,000 per year, but she also proposed increasing taxes on the wealthy through policies like the Fair Share Surcharge and the Buffett Rule. She also pushed for closing loopholes like carried interest and adding fees on high-frequency traders. In short, Trump wanted to cut taxes across the board, especially on corporations and top earners, while Clinton wanted to raise taxes on wealthy households to pay for new investments. Now let's talk about jobs and infrastructure. In 2016, Trump campaigned on a mix of tax cuts, deregulation, and tariffs. Where have we heard that word before? His America First agenda emphasized renegotiating trade deals like NAFTA, imposing tariffs on countries he said were taking advantage of the US, and reducing regulations he argued were holding back business growth. He also talked about a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, but left most specifics to later negotiations. Clinton, meanwhile, also supported major infrastructure spending, but her plan was far more detailed and front-loaded. As I already mentioned, she proposed a 5-year, $275 billion infrastructure package with another $250 billion in financing. So while both candidates talked about big infrastructure, Clinton anchored her plan in public investment, whereas Trump leaned on private financing and deregulation to spur development. Their approaches to trade were arguably the single biggest difference between the two candidates when it comes to the economy, though. Trump ran on renegotiating or even withdrawing from trade agreements he viewed as harmful, including NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as the TPP. Once in office, he followed through, withdrawing from the TPP on day one and initiating NAFTA renegotiations that eventually produced the USMCA. Clinton, meanwhile, opposed the TPP by the time she reached the general election, but she made it clear she still supported trade agreements if they included stronger labor and environmental protections. She did not support withdrawing from NAFTA and instead proposed modernizing it through diplomacy. Both candidates framed their positions as protecting American workers, but Trump emphasized protectionist tools like tariffs, while Clinton leaned toward negotiated standards and reforms. Finally, their regulatory philosophies diverged just as sharply as everything else. Trump pledged a massive deregulatory push, famously introducing the 2-for-1 rule, requiring 2 regulations to be eliminated for every new one added. Clinton, on the other hand, emphasized regulation as a tool for both consumer and financial protection, supporting expansions of Dodd-Frank oversight, new rules on Wall Street, and tighter climate and environmental standards. So overall, both candidates talked about helping middle-class families, but their paths to get there couldn't have been more different. Trump leaned heavily on tax cuts, tariffs, and deregulation to stimulate growth from the top down. Clinton emphasized targeted taxes on the wealthy, large public investments, and stronger worker protections to grow the economy from the middle out. So there were two very different strategies here. With all of that in mind, though, it's now time to shift our attention to a different policy topic: immigration. Trump's immigration policy versus Clinton's immigration policy. Bit of a quicker section here. When it comes to immigration, Trump and Clinton couldn't have been further apart in philosophy, tone, and actual policy plans. Let's get into it. To start with Trump, his 2016 immigration platform revolved around strict enforcement and reducing both legal and illegal immigration. One of his signature campaign promises, as I'm sure you all remember, was building a physical border wall along the US-Mexico border and making Mexico pay for it, an idea he repeated throughout 2016 and placed at the center of his messaging. He also called for ending catch and release, expanding ICE and Border Patrol staffing, creating a deportation task force, and cutting federal funding for sanctuary cities. On top of that, his platform proposed suspending immigration from regions tied to terrorism, which ultimately became the basis for the 2017 travel ban targeting several Muslim-majority countries. A lot of that is actually now stuff we've seen reappear in 2025, but that's besides the point. So while Trump framed immigration primarily as a security issue, Clinton framed it as a humanitarian and economic integration issue, which is largely how we've seen it drawn across party lines, especially today. Another sharp difference was how they approached asylum and refugee policy. Trump argued for extreme vetting of refugees and proposed sharply reducing refugee admissions overall. His campaign repeatedly criticized the refugee resettlement process and alleged it risked national security. This laid the groundwork for his later 2017 executive order reducing refugee caps and suspending the Syrian refugee program. Clinton, by contrast, called for increasing the US refugee cap, particularly for Syrian families displaced by war. She actually supported raising the annual refugee ceiling to 65,000 specifically for Syrians on top of regular admissions. Legal immigration was another area where their visions diverged. Trump argued that the US should shift toward a merit-based immigration system modeled on countries like Canada and Australia, with the goal of reducing overall visa issuance and protecting US workers. Clinton supported expanding legal immigration pathways, speeding up visa processing, and improving access to work permits for spouses, parents, and workers stuck in backlog-heavy categories, which was a huge difference from Trump's enforcement-first stance. So in short, while both of these candidates wanted to fix the immigration process, the paths they laid out couldn't have been any more different. That's pretty obvious here. Had Clinton won in 2016, the country's approach to immigration would have been far less hardline than what we actually saw, at least when it came to tone and rhetoric. But as we know, Trump has never really been one to care about that. Anyways, with immigration now covered, let's shift our focus over to foreign policy. Trump's foreign policy versus Clinton's foreign policy. In terms of foreign policy, the contrast between Trump and Clinton in 2016 was once again extremely sharp. No surprise there. Both talked about restoring American strength on the global stage, but their definitions of strength were fundamentally different. Here's how. We're going to start with alliances. In 2016, Trump ran on a platform that questioned the value of long-standing institutions like NATO. He repeatedly criticized NATO members for not paying their fair share and suggested the US might not defend allies who didn't meet their defense spending commitments, which is once again something we've seen Trump doing today too. He also floated withdrawing from security arrangements that he believed disadvantaged the US, framing alliances as transactional relationships where America should expect direct returns. Clinton went in the opposite direction. She repeatedly emphasized the importance of NATO, calling it, quote, the most successful military alliance in the history of the world, and warned that undermining it would weaken global stability. In a Clinton presidency, reaffirming commitments to NATO and reassuring European allies would likely have been immediate priorities. It would have been really interesting to see how this played out with tensions continuing to increase with Russia, too. Speaking of, relations with Russia were another major point of divergence. Trump frequently praised Vladimir Putin during the 2016 campaign, calling him a strong leader and arguing that the US should pursue a more cooperative relationship with Russia. Clinton took a far harder line. She explicitly accused Russia of orchestrating cyber attacks to influence the election and argued that the US must stand up to Putin through sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Now let's move over to the Middle East, which provided yet another area where the two candidates envisioned very different roles for the US. Trump campaigned on destroying ISIS through more aggressive military action, insisting he had a plan to defeat the group quickly. He also advocated for seizing Iraqi oil as compensation for US involvement in the region. On top of that, he pledged to get rid of the Iran nuclear deal, which is something he ultimately did in 2018. Clinton, meanwhile, supported the Iran nuclear agreement and argued that it was preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. On ISIS, she supported the Obama administration's approach of targeted airstrikes and support for local forces, but without deploying large numbers of US ground troops. Syria specifically was another dividing line. Trump repeatedly criticized the Obama administration's handling of the Syrian civil war during his campaign, but offered few details beyond partnering with Russia to solve the problem. Clinton, meanwhile, supported establishing no-fly zones to protect civilians. A Clinton presidency would have likely taken a more assertive approach to humanitarian protection in Syria, whereas Trump signaled he would deprioritize regime change and focus narrowly on counterterrorism. So overall, both candidates talked about reasserting American leadership, but they meant two very different things when they said that. Trump saw leadership as renegotiating alliances, using US leverage unilaterally, and adopting a more transactional, deal-driven approach, much like we see with him as president today. Clinton saw leadership as reinforcing alliances, confronting adversaries through coordinated pressure, and maintaining the post-World War II global order. The result is that a Clinton presidency would have moved almost in the exact opposite direction from the one Trump charted once he entered the White House. And who knows how that could have impacted things down the line, like the war between Russia and Ukraine, the Syrian civil war, Israel's attacks in Iran, and much more. The domino effect here truly would have been massive. But anyways, with foreign policy out of the way, let's get into the final section of today's video and talk about social policy differences. Trump's social policy versus Clinton's social policy. Okay, social policy, super fun topic here. I know you're all probably getting tired of hearing my voice at this point, so let's just dive right in, starting with healthcare. In 2016, Trump campaigned on a promise to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act on day one, calling Obamacare a quote-unquote disaster that he said was driving up premiums and limiting healthcare choice. Clinton, meanwhile, ran on strengthening the ACA. She proposed adding a public option, expanding subsidies, capping out-of-pocket drug costs at $250 per month, and allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. She framed healthcare as a universal right, while Trump framed it as a marketplace that needed more competition. Reproductive rights were another major dividing line here. Clinton was one of the strongest pro-choice candidates in modern presidential history. She supported codifying Roe v. Wade, repealing the Hyde Amendment, and protecting Planned Parenthood funding. Trump took the inverse position, pledging to appoint Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe, which eventually did happen, as we know, and supporting bans on late-term abortion with very limited exceptions. This was one of the starkest ideological contrasts of the entire campaign. You can't really get more different here. LGBTQ+ rights told a similar story as well. Clinton ran on passing the Equality Act, which would have banned discrimination against LGBTQ+ Americans nationwide. She repeatedly promised to protect transgender students under Title IX and maintain Obama-era federal protections in areas like housing and healthcare. Trump, meanwhile, promised to rescind Obama's federal guidance on transgender bathroom access, which is something he ultimately did in 2017, and it's also worth noting he selected Mike Pence, a longtime conservative on LGBTQ+ issues, as his vice president. Although Trump sometimes said same-sex marriage was settled law, his administration also signaled support for broad religious exemption provisions affecting LGBTQ+ protections. Criminal justice policy was another area where Trump and Clinton talked about fixing the system, but again offered completely different solutions. Trump's platform emphasized law and order, support for police, and expanding stop and frisk, which he defended repeatedly during his campaign. Clinton, meanwhile, supported ending mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, reforming the bail system, and eliminating the federal private prison industry. She acknowledged her past support for the 1994 crime bill, but framed her platform as a push toward community-based policing and sentencing reform, which was a very interesting shift to observe from her. Basically, both Clinton and Trump spent 2016 talking about protecting American families, but they wanted to do so in very different ways. Social policy under a Clinton presidency, had she won the 2016 election, would have centered around expanding federal protections, investing in public systems like healthcare and education, and enshrining civil rights through federal law. That was her goal, but whether she would have been able to accomplish all of that or not is a different story. For the final portion of this video though, I want to shift the focus a bit. Had Clinton won in 2016, what would Trump's future in politics have looked like? Could he have run again as the Republican candidate in 2020, or would he have been tossed aside? Let's find out. Would Trump have made a comeback? Getting straight into it, I think the simple answer to this question is yes, absolutely. Now, I'm not saying Trump would have been guaranteed to be the Republican nominee in 2020 had he lost to Clinton in 2016, but I do think he definitely would have at least tried to run again. The guy hates losing. That should be obvious to everyone by now. So let's play through this scenario really quickly. Assuming Clinton didn't do an absolutely horrible job as president, she probably would have been the favorite to be the Democratic nominee in 2020 as well. I don't think her first presidency would have had as much drama or theatrics as Trump's first presidency, so that's worth considering too. She'd probably face some challenges from the younger side of the Democratic Party, think Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, and others like that, but overall I think the path for her to become the nominee again would have been pretty clear. Trump, meanwhile, would have faced an extremely crowded Republican primary had he lost the general election in 2016. Other Republicans would be able to point at him and say, look, this guy already lost once, we should try something new. People like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio would probably give it another go, as both of them received decent support in the 2016 primary. We'd also probably see names like Ron DeSantis jump into the mix too, maybe Nikki Haley. All of them could say that Trump didn't work the first time, so why are we doing it again? But there's also the possibility that Trump's base would still be very strong. Who knows how much influence he would have had politically if he had lost? Given that he was able to rebound from something like January 6th and the aftermath of that though, I think it's fair to say that he could have rebounded from a loss in the 2016 election too. So while it may not have been the most likely outcome here, I think that had Clinton won the 2016 election over Trump, we very well could have seen a rematch between the two candidates come 2020. And what that would have meant for our country as a whole, I have no idea. But that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed or learned something new, please feel free to like and subscribe. More videos coming soon. If you're interested in learning more about anything I talked about today, please feel free to check out my sources in the description down below. I'd highly recommend doing so, as they may shine some more light on anything I discussed in this video. Thank you so much for watching and for all your continued support. I really appreciate it. Hope I see you next time. Take care.